Sam Elliott finally reveals what most fans never figured out about Tombstone. There are movies that entertain, and then there are movies that endure. Tombstone, released in December 1993, belongs firmly in the second category. More than 3 decades after its release, fans still quote its lines, debate its performances, and revisit its dusty Arizona landscapes with the kind of devotion usually reserved for sacred texts. Val Kilmer's Doc Holliday became one of the most electric performances in Western cinema history. Kurt Russell's Wyatt Earp radiated a cold, commanding fury that felt genuinely dangerous. But for years, one man who stood at the center of that film has carried a truth that most fans never fully understood. And now, Sam Elliott has finally begun to speak it out loud. What Elliott revealed was not about gunfights or glory. It was about something far more human. The grief of watching a vision crumble, the quiet dignity of carrying on anyway, and the strange poetry of playing a character whose story mirrored your own in ways nobody planned. To understand what Elliott finally revealed, you have to go back to the very beginning, before a single frame was shot, before the costumes were fitted, before the desert sun baked the set in Tucson. You have to understand what Tombstone was supposed to be and what it actually became. Sam Elliott was 50 years old when he read Kevin Jarre's screenplay for Tombstone. By that point in his career, he had built a reputation as one of Hollywood's most dependable character actors. His voice alone could fill a room. His mustache had become practically mythological. But supporting roles, no matter how well executed, had a ceiling, and Elliott knew it. When Jarre's script landed in his hands, something shifted. The screenplay was unlike most westerns circulating through Hollywood at the time. Jarre had not written a simple shoot-'em-up. He had written a family saga wrapped inside a historical epic. The Earp brothers, Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan, were portrayed not as legends performing for history, but as complicated men carrying the weight of duty, loyalty, and consequence. Virgil Earp, the older brother, was given particular depth. He was the steady one, the lawman who believed in order when the world around him descended into chaos. For Elliott, who had spent his entire career chasing exactly this kind of grounded, dignified role, Virgil felt like a calling. He signed on with genuine excitement, a rare emotion in an industry that conditions its veterans toward careful skepticism. He believed in the material. He believed in the ensemble gathering around it. Russell, Kilmer, Michael Biehn, Powers Booth, Bill Paxton. He believed that Tombstone could be something genuinely lasting. What he could not have predicted was how severely the road from script to screen would punish that belief. Kevin Jarre was hired not only to write Tombstone, but to direct it. This was an unusual arrangement, and in hindsight, a fragile one. Jarre was a gifted writer. His work on Glory had already demonstrated his ability to handle historical material with intelligence and emotional weight. But directing a major studio western with a large ensemble cast, an ambitious scope, and a locked Christmas release date was an entirely different undertaking. Filming began in the spring of 1993, and problems surfaced almost immediately. Jarre's directorial instincts leaned toward wide, sweeping compositions that evoked the classical westerns of an earlier Hollywood era. Cinematically, these choices had a certain grandeur, but they worked against the intimacy that made his own screenplay so powerful. The close-ups that should have captured the tension in an actor's eyes, the quiet exchanges between brothers that gave the story its emotional foundation. These were being sacrificed for scale. Scenes that should have taken a day were consuming 2 or 3. The production fell behind schedule almost from the first week. The studio, Disney's Hollywood Pictures, had already announced a Christmas 1993 release. That deadline was not flexible. As the days stacked up and the budget strained, the decision was made swiftly and ruthlessly. Kevin Jarre was removed from the director's chair. For the cast, it was a genuinely disorienting moment. The man who had conceived this story, who understood every character in it at a molecular level, had been taken off his own film. Elliott later described the moment as carrying a particular sadness. Jarre had written something true and meaningful, and to see him separated from it felt less like a business decision and more like a wound. George P. Cosmatos was brought in to replace Jar and stabilize the production. Cosmatos was a professional with real credits. Rambo, First Blood Part 2, and Cobra among them. And he brought exactly the discipline and pace that a floundering production needed. But here is what Sam Elliott eventually helped confirm to the public, a truth that had circulated in Hollywood circles for years before it was spoken plainly. Cosmatos was not, in any meaningful creative sense, directing Tombstone. Kurt Russell was. Each night, after the cameras stopped rolling, Russell would sit down and map out the following day's work. He drafted shot lists, restructured scenes, and made the kind of granular creative decisions that define a film's visual and emotional language. Val Kilmer, who was living in Russell's guest house during the production, has corroborated this account. Cosmatos executed what Russell designed. The finished film, for all its energy and craft, was in practical terms an uncredited Kurt Russell production. Elliot respected Russell for stepping up when the film needed saving. He said so clearly, but he also understood what Russell's takeover actually meant for the story they were all trying to tell. With Cosmatos as the nominal director and Russell steering the ship toward what could be completed on time and in budget, Jar's original screenplay was systematically reduced. Scenes were cut, storylines were compressed, and the pages that suffered most were the ones that lived in the space between action sequences, the quiet, human moments that gave the Earp brothers weight beyond their legend. This is the part of the Tombstone story that Sam Elliott has spoken about with the clearest sorrow. Nearly 30 pages of Jar's original script were removed during the reshaping of the production. These were not expendable scenes. They were the connective tissue of the story. They showed Virgil and Morgan Earp as full human beings, men with fears, with humor, with the kind of family bonds that make tragedy actually feel like tragedy. Elliot has acknowledged in interviews over the years that had he known the extent of these cuts before filming began, he might not have taken the role at all. That is a striking admission from a man not given to complaint or drama. He was not speaking from ego. He was speaking from the perspective of an actor who had made a decision based on what the character was supposed to be, only to find the character steadily diminished as production ground forward. What remained for Virgil on screen was still honorable work. Elliot brought everything he had to every scene he was given. His physical presence, his weathered stillness, his ability to communicate volumes without dialogue. None of that disappeared. But the architecture that was supposed to support those moments had been largely dismantled. Virgil became a supporting figure in a story that was originally designed to give him equal footing. Elliot did not simply accept this quietly. He found ways, within what remained, to preserve fragments of Jar's intention. He held pauses a beat longer than the script required. He layered gestures with meaning. He slipped back pieces of dialogue where he could, quiet acts of creative resistance that were less about self-promotion and more about honoring the character he had committed to. There is a moment in the film, easy to miss amid the surrounding chaos, where Virgil stops to help a child before the violence at the OK Corral begins. It is brief. It is almost buried. But Elliot has pointed to it as one of the clearest expressions of who Virgil actually was. A man governed by protection and duty, not by the hunger for confrontation. While Tombstone was clawing its way toward completion, another version of the same story was being filmed in New Mexico. Kevin Costner, still riding the enormous cultural momentum of Dances with Wolves, was starring in and producing Wyatt Earp with director Lawrence Kasdan. That production had luxuries Tombstone never enjoyed. A budget reportedly more than twice as large, a longer shooting schedule, and the full promotional machinery of a major studio behind one of its biggest stars. The anxiety on the Tombstone set was real. Russell felt it most visibly. How could their scrappy, chaos-born production compete with a 3-hour epic backed by Hollywood's infrastructure and headlined by one of the era's biggest names? Elliot, characteristically, cut through the hand-wringing with the kind of directness that defined both him and the character he was playing. When Russell laid out his worries one evening, Elliot reportedly stopped him and said flatly that Costner's film did not have their cast or their script. That was the only thing that mattered. Everything else was noise. History bore out Elliot's confidence in a way that must have felt deeply satisfying. Tombstone opened on Christmas Eve 1993 and earned approximately $56 million in North America, more than double its production budget. When Wyatt Earp arrived the following summer, it struggled. Despite its ambitions and its polish, it felt airless and exhausting next to the crackling energy of Tombstone. Costner's version of the story faded. Tombstone became a classic. Here is what most fans, even devoted ones, never fully grasped about Tombstone. The film they love is a diminished version of something that could have been even greater. The chaos behind the camera was not incidental to the final product. It shaped it fundamentally. The director who conceived the story never finished it. The pages that gave the Earp family its emotional depth were largely cut away. The film that emerged was built as much from improvisation and crisis management as from deliberate artistic vision. And yet, and this is the part that makes Tombstone genuinely fascinating rather than merely troubled, what survived is extraordinary. Val Kilmer's performance as Doc Holliday remains one of the great screen turns in any genre. Russell's Wyatt is ferocious and compelling. The ensemble crackles with authentic chemistry. The film moves with a propulsive energy that 3 decades have not diminished. What Sam Elliott finally helped the world understand is that this achievement came at a real cost, and that the cost was paid quietly, mostly by people audiences never watch closely enough. Elliot's Virgil Earp is the emblem of that hidden story. Critics and scholars revisiting Tombstone have increasingly recognized what Elliot brought to the film: a moral gravity, a sense of duty, a physical and emotional steadiness that grounded everything around it. He has been called the film's conscience. He was the character who acted out of principle when others acted out of anger or ambition. That was not an accident. It was the product of an actor who understood his role deeply, who grieved what was taken from it, and who refused to let what remained go to waste. Sam Elliott has never been the kind of man who shouts his grievances. He has spoken about Tombstone over the years with a balance of pride and sorrow that feels entirely authentic. He is proud of what the film became. He is haunted by what it might have been. Both things are true simultaneously, and he holds them both without pretending otherwise.